Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Wolt, Editor-in-Chief of Mass Market Retailers and Chain Drug Review. Welcome to our video forum. We're thrilled today to have as our guest Leslie Sarasin, President and Chief Executive Officer of FMI, the Food Industry Association. Leslie, welcome back to our webcast.
Thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure. Happy to be with you.
Last time we talked on camera, we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and obviously your members were scrambling to adjust to a new reality. Now that things appear to be getting better, and I say that because no one knows what will happen with the Delta variant, as we were talking a minute ago, but things are better for the moment, and people are returning to a more normal patterns of behavior. What new challenges has that created for FMI and its membership?
Well, I think from the standpoint of challenges, it's useful for us to look back at a bit to what we've been through in the past 16 or 17 months. And as we look back, I think the investment that's been made by the food industry to keep Americans both safe and fed is important to note. Because it's these investments that have really set the stage for the future of their businesses and for how they're going to compete as we move into whatever the next normal is going to look like. This is particularly true in a business like ours on the retail side with such narrow margins. But as you know, Jeff, you've seen the research that we've done. Overall, the additional expenses incurred by the food retail industry to keep them operating during COVID amounted to almost $24 billion. We're talking about increased payroll, employee benefits, all the PPE that was required for the stores, and other safety expenses. And then, of course, particularly the cleaning and sanitation efforts that were stepped up so significantly. So I think that's an important note here. And it's particularly important, I think, for us to think about the investments that were made in technology advancement. Those were made, of course, to accommodate the consumer demands that occurred throughout the pandemic. Because at that point, retailers had spent about $450 million on technology alone for online shopping. I think these investments are going to continue to be made because of the change in the way customers are shopping. As you may have seen in our 2021 U.S. grocery shopper trends, before COVID, about half of grocery shoppers shopped some online. Mm-hmm. Now 2/3 of shoppers do. And I think of special note is that the Gen Zs and millennials are very invested in online shopping. And of course, those are the generations of our future shoppers. So I think what we can expect is that going forward, we will continue to have a fair amount of online shopping. Another big investment area for our companies was labor. Obviously, making sure we had enough people in the stores to accommodate what needed to be done while they were there, particularly with this online demand and being able to respond to meeting the online orders and that sort of thing. Our retailers increased their team sizes by about 10% during the pandemic. And what they've reported to us is that the costs associated with that are up about 12%. Mm-hmm. So all of these investments that have been made, I think, have set the stage for what we will be seeing as we move forward. I think we will be looking for our companies to be thinking about how they're going to compete going forward for that food, that dollar spend on food away from home. As you know, the numbers really shifted during the pandemic. For years, we were about a 50-50 split of food at home and food away from home. Mm-hmm. That had shifted prior to the pandemic to food away from home being a little bit more prominent. And then within days, practically, that shifted again. And so I think what we'll see going forward is that we'll be making sure in the retail sector that we have the attractive food service options that our companies are looking for. And then, the supply chain. I don't think there's anybody in the industry right now who isn't thinking about supply chain issues. We learned a lot about supply chain during the pandemic. And so I think there will be a lot of focus on making sure that the supply chain issues are being addressed and that we can accommodate what our customers are looking for. So I think, there's a lot for us to be multitasking with these days. And I think the companies have proven that they're up to the task. And so there'll be a lot on our plate.
Let me ask you about a few things that you mentioned. Is there any way of projecting how the balance between food away from home and store shopping will wind up once we return to the new normal, whatever the new normal might be?
But what our consumers are telling us is that they anticipate continuing to eat many more meals at home than they did prior to the pandemic.
Mhm.
Now, I think what the numbers seem to be indicating currently is that as we begin to open up, restaurants are gaining favor among their customers. And there's that, I think, natural inclination to get out of our homes for a little bit,
Mhm.
to have dinner out.
Mhm.
But what customers are telling us is that they've really enjoyed this opportunity to bond more with their families.
Mhm.
I think we've all developed, either if we didn't have a very close working relationship with our kitchens, we've developed one, and if we did have one, we have certainly enhanced that relationship. So I think these new cooking skills that we've learned and the opportunity to have more bonding time with our families, I think these are things that are going to stay with us for a while. And I think that's why it's important for our retailers to have those food service options available for their customers on a regular basis.
And that trend obviously dovetails very nicely with your family meals program.
It absolutely does. And of course, family meals became sort of the way of life during the pandemic. We laugh sometimes about my husband used to always say, for better or for worse, but not for lunch. And so I think we've all learned new ways of coping with our families, and that's been a positive thing. The importance of family meals, I think, has been acknowledged through the pandemic, and I think many more customers are paying attention to that. Last year after the September Family Meals Month, the data was off the charts and up significantly from the previous year on how many people actually saw Family Meals Month information and took action
Mhm.
based on on the information that we had out.
Mhm.
So that's very encouraging, I think, to all of us.
What does that mean for the supermarket itself, the brick and mortar supermarket? Do you see that changing in significant ways?
I think that's an interesting question. I'm not one of those who has ever subscribed to the theory that, there's soon to be a death of the brick and mortar store.
Mhm.
I just don't believe that. As a shopper myself, and as one who observes this industry and looks at the data on what our customers tell us, I just think that people are going to want to be in stores. They
Mhm.
want to see things, new opportunities, new products. I think our customers still want to be in the store, and I think they want the convenience of shopping online. I think it's not an either or, but a but and.
Mhm.
And I think the most successful retailers, in my judgment, are the ones that are best able to balance that,
Mhm.
um, to create an experience in store for their shoppers that makes the shopper want to be in the store sometimes or
Mhm.
most of the time, but also is able to meet their needs when they want to just be able to sort of fly by and do a click and collect, for example. So I think it's going to be a combination of shopping, and I'm certainly living my life that way. And I think most people are beginning to figure out how to do that.
Before we move away from the whole COVID situation, have perceptions on the part of consumers or retailers of what the supermarket is and the role it serves changed as a result of the pandemic?
Oh, I certainly think so. I laugh when I think about supply chain. Prior to the pandemic, I think we'd be hard pressed to find anyone, just very many people at least in the general population, who ever gave 1 minute's thought to the supply chain, particularly in the food industry. And what I noticed during the pandemic is on the evening news, in conversations, et cetera, everyone talked about the supply chain and had begun to understand a little bit more about how it works. So I think that perception and that understanding of how the industry functions and all of the dynamics that are there,
Mhm.
the opportunities for glitches and the challenges along the way, I think has really helped the consuming public better understand the industry at large,
Mhm.
and also to have a deeper respect for
Mhm.
what the industry does every single day. I think that's true certainly on the retail side. I mean, there's no question that we all talked about the local heroes in our local
Mhm.
supermarkets, and the fact that they were there every day, they were open almost every day, and they
Mhm.
did everything they could to accommodate their customers' needs. That
Mhm.
essentiality, I think, of those roles became very important. I
Mhm.
also think that is true in the product supplier side of the business. We had gone through a period of years where um, big food and the CPG industry were sometimes maligned
Mhm.
in how they function and what they do in our society. I think the vast majority of concerns about that have certainly gone out the window. I
Mhm.
think people now truly understand much better how important the supplier community is, how responsive they were during difficult times,
Mhm.
and how they work so hard to meet customer needs. So I think the perception of the industry is probably at an all-time high, at least in my
Mhm.
career in the industry. And I also think that presents opportunities for
Mhm.
us as an industry. It would be unfortunate, I think, if we as an industry did not take advantage of the opportunity to continue to share with our customer base all the things we do to contribute to society, and all the things we do as an industry to make sure that they have all of the choices and the options. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we have the most abundant and most cost efficient food supply in the world. That's something we all as a nation ought to better understand and
Mhm.
appreciate.
Food price inflation obviously is becoming an issue. I mean, we had a report just yesterday that overall inflation rate has jumped considerably. What implications does that have for supermarket operators?
It's an issue of concern, of course. And certainly during the pandemic, there were tremendous opportunities for contributions to increases in food prices.
Mhm.
There, as you know all too well, there are so many factors that feed into how products are priced.
Mhm.
And we're talking now about every part of the supply chain, from the farm in many cases, or the manufacturing facility, all the way to the customer's home. So there, all of the costs in between there have increased.
Mhm.
I think what we see our retailers trying to do is everything they can to address this internally,
Mhm.
to not pass on as much cost increase as they're experiencing, because they want to try to maintain a reasonable price level for their customers. So yes, it is of concern. It's something our companies are focusing on and working very hard to try to address, and figure out additional efficiencies to try to keep prices as low as possible.
Let me shift gears here and ask about health and wellness, which I know is one area that FMI has focused on. Recently, you guys put out a report that said consumers' perception of well-being is changing. Can you tell us what you found?
Yes, it's interesting. I think in the health and well-being space, it's something that FMI has been focused on fairly significantly for a number of years, but intensely so in the last 18 months, I would say. Um, what our data shows is that the pandemic has brought issues of food, the connection between food and health, to levels that have never been acknowledged before. We, in our research you referenced, we asked consumers what they think about their own diets
Mhm.
and how they feel about them as a result of having spent this time in a pandemic. And what we learned is that 41% of consumers believe that their diet is healthy enough, or as healthy as it can be. And that's about 14 points higher than it had been the previous year.
Mhm.
So consumers are thinking about this, and they are trying to purchase and serve meals in their homes that are consistent with whatever their dietary goals are from a health perspective. That's really important for all of us in the industry to acknowledge,
Mhm.
because we need to be responsive to that, and we need to be able to help meet those needs. As you know, retail dietitians have been a huge part of this focus within our stores. And I think the combination of being able to have food as a focus for diet and health, and then also having the pharmacy available, having dietitians and nutritionists available in store to help people plan diets for whatever health condition or health outcome they're trying to achieve. These are all really important things that happen in the supermarket.
Mhm.
And there are really very few other places where that kind of combination can happen. So it's
Mhm.
an important role.
How much more do your members need to do to seize that opportunity?
I think there are a number of companies who have maximized it very well. I would say that in the industry there are various levels of progress.
Mhm.
Our companies are all at sort of different places in their lifespan of focusing on this.
Mhm.
So one of the challenges for us is to make sure that we provide services that meet all of our members where they are and
Mhm.
help them at whatever level they're at. The vaccine issue became an important one and provided yet another opportunity for our pharmacies to be able to meet customer needs and take this more holistic view.
Mhm.
I didn't realize this prior to the pandemic, but what we know is that prior to the pandemic, I think it's like 40% of all flu shots were actually given at pharmacies in supermarkets, because so many people in our population have become accustomed to go into the local grocery store to the pharmacy to get a flu shot. It was an easy transition for them to do the same thing when it came time to get a COVID vaccine. So this has presented yet another opportunity for our companies to provide the kinds of services that I think our customers are looking for when it comes to health and well-being.
Leslie, we're talking about healthcare. I know one specific issue that FMI and others are focused on are DIR fees in the pharmacy department. Maybe you can tell us where you see that issue headed.
This is certainly an important issue for FMI members who have pharmacies. As you know, Jeff, these threats that are pending and existing, frankly, for our pharmacies in the form of clawback of fees associated with the sale of pharmaceutical goods is tremendously important for our companies. The fees are ones that come late, long after the sale has been consummated and everything is done. And they are increasing in value and importance to our companies. I think the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services recently said that DIR fees have grown by about 91,500% between 2010 and 2019. You know, these are these are big numbers.
Mhm.
They are huge numbers for our companies. So much so that several of our very prominent companies have sold their pharmacies and
Mhm.
are not in the pharmacy business anymore because it became so challenging for them to be able to address this. Fortunately, there is legislation pending in the Congress that we think is important and we're hopeful about. The bill is called the Pharmacy DIR Reform to Reduce Senior Drug Costs Act. And it's one that has been introduced both in the House and the Senate and is one that FMI is supporting. In fact, we actually co-hosted with a number of our colleague associations in Washington an event at a pharmacy on Capitol Hill,
Mhm.
where we created an event to talk about what these fees are, how expensive they are, how detrimental they are to the health supply industry and to consumers at the end of the day. And we have a group letter that had about 250 organizations on it that we then delivered to Capitol Hill. So a lot of work going on in this area because it is such a big number, and this need for transparency from the PBMs to understand what the fees are,
Mm.
understand them in a better, more timely way, and understand what their value is to the end consumer.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, where they were created to help the consumer. What's evolved over time due to lack of regulatory enforcement is not much transparency and perhaps not much assistance for the ultimate customer.
Final question for you, Leslie. In light of everything that we've discussed, uh, and assuming we don't get a big curveball from COVID, what are your priorities as you look to the balance of this year and into 2022?
Well, first and foremost, we are going to continue our efforts to help our companies get through the pandemic and help them evolve into whatever this next normal is going to be. So as you and I have discussed previously, I'm not convinced that we're out of the woods yet
Mhm.
on the pandemic. I think this new Delta variant is bringing a new complexion to our best laid plans for moving forward. And so I think we need to be vigilant and pay close attention, and we'll continue to do that and help our companies in whatever ways we can. I think some of those areas then lead into some of our advocacy work.
Mhm.
We have spent a lot of time focusing on issues related to helping the hungry in this country gain access to food. So
Mhm.
continuing advocacy on the SNAP program, advocacy on the WIC program, issues related to nutrition and health. These are all things that we're going to be continued to work on. Obviously, labor is a tremendous challenge going forward, both the cost associated with it and actually finding it.
Mhm.
And so we will be working with our companies to help them do what they need to do to attract the kind of personnel they need to accomplish their goals. There are a couple of issues that we continually focus on. One is payments issues related to the fees that are associated with use of debit and credit cards. As we move into even more use of online shopping, those fees are going to be even more important than they have been historically, and they've always been quite significant for our retailers. So payment issues are ones that we will continue to work on. And I couldn't do an interview with you without mentioning food safety.
Mhm.
We continue to focus on food safety, issues related to traceability of particularly produce issues, and doing everything we can in conjunction with our retailers to continue to have the safest food supply in the world.
Mhm. Well, the industry is fortunate to have such an effective advocate, and we thank you for your time, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to be with you.